You know, we started in the book of Romans, talking about Israel in the book of Romans. And we're still there. But I want us to start with a couple verses in the book of Galatians. Now, there's more than just Israel in the book of Romans, as we all know. There's salvation,
Amen.
many other things. And hopefully we will cover those things. But I would like for us to turn to Galatians chapter 2. Galatians chapter 2. Because we want to solidify some things in our spiritual consciousness. Here and here. You know, we say our mind and our heart. And the Bible uses the term reins, and it's translated kidneys. Kind of strange. Well, can you get the Word of God in your kidneys?
Why not?
Kind of strange sounding, but
Yes.
it says in your reins. And so I guess it would mean the innermost part of your being. You know, the whole being. So I want us, as we study the book of Romans, I want these verses to be our theme verse. Galatians 2, verse 20. I want us all to read it together in a real, solemn, sacred way as we read together verse 20. I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God. You do not live by your own faith.
Amen. Amen.
Don't depend on yourself.
Amen.
Does that resonate with anybody?
Yes.
Don't depend on yourself.
Amen.
We've all heard for years, don't depend on other people. Well, the other people are looking at you and saying, don't depend on other people. You follow me? In other words, so don't trust yourself, because self is really tricky.
Deceiving.
The heart of man
Yes.
is desperately wicked. That's your heart.
Yes.
That's my heart.
Amen.
And so we live by the faith of the Son of God.
Hallelujah.
Amen.
But the prerequisite to living by the faith of Son of God is the first part of the verse. I am, what is it? I am crucified. What does that mean? What does crucified mean?
Put to death.
Yes.
You're put to death in a most cruel manner.
Yes.
I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live. Okay? Galatians chapter 6. Verse 14. These are good verses to memorize.
Yeah.
All together. But God forbid that I should glory save in the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ, by whom the world is crucified unto me, and I unto the world. The world is dead, and I'm dead. So how can two dead objects have relationship with one another? You know, you go to the boneyard, there's all kinds of, they're not communicating with one another. They're not talking because they don't have the ability. They're dead.
Amen.
So it's like the world and us, we should be dead to the world. That's another sermon. But anyway, Paul is writing to the Israelites. And these are some of the major themes in the book of Romans. Paul is writing to the Israelites. Number 2, both Judah and Israel were under the condemnation of the law. Condemnation of the law. Number 3, there is no justification in law keeping. No justification. Number 4, justification is by grace and grace alone.
Amen.
We have no reason to boast. If the Lord has worked 100 miracles by your hands or by your faith, you still have no reason to boast.
Amen.
Hallelujah.
Jesus talked about servants that were sent out into the field to work. Their master sent them out there. They worked all day long. At the end of the workday, they came indoors. And he said, you still have to wash my feet.
Yes.
They thought, the implication is they thought that they were going to be commended for all the good work that they had done that day. But he said, no, you still have to wash my feet. Justification is by grace and grace alone. Number 5, this grace is found in Christ and Christ alone.
Amen.
Saved by grace. Preserved by grace. You see, there's such a thing as a conversion experience with Christ.
Yes. Amen.
And then that preservation period
Yeah.
until you breathe your last.
Hallelujah.
You follow me?
Amen.
It's by grace.
Amen.
It's not by, well, I did this or I did that.
Hallelujah.
Church attendance is good, etc. That's just part of the preservation.
Amen.
Amen.
And Jude told the saints, he said, keep yourself in the love of God. Keep yourself among the body,
Yes.
among the saints, etc.
Amen.
And then we read our theme verses, Galatians 2 and Galatians 6. So we come back to the thought of Galatians 6:14. But God forbid that I should glory save in the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Amen.
God forbid that I should glory in anything religiously. If you have talent, whatever it may be, if God has given you something, it's a gift.
Amen.
You might have developed it, but it's a gift.
Amen.
So it's nothing that we can brag about.
Amen.
And I might throw this in. It's, to me, inappropriate for men to put their name on their ministry.
Yes.
Amen.
Amen.
You follow me?
Amen.
You don't have to agree.
Amen.
But,
Own
Right.
Alfred E. Newman Ministry. call it something else.
Yes. Yes. Amen. Glory to God.
It's not our ministry.
No, it's
Amen.
not. It's not.
It's really not.
Yeah.
We have nothing to boast of.
Glory to God.
Nothing. So Paul, in the book of Romans, I think he gets the message across to both the Judeans and the 10-tribe Israelites. Don't boast in law-keeping or any other thing, because it's nothing but waste.
Amen.
Nothing but waste. Now, we have often wondered, I know I have, why the Lord has not opened up this truth to the whole church world that we are the house of Israel. I've often wondered about it. So let's turn to Matthew chapter 13. And hold your finger there and turn to Proverbs 25. Two different places. Proverbs chapter 25. It says this, verse 2, the first part.
Yes.
It is the glory of God to conceal a thing.
Amen.
The second part, but the honor of kings is to search out a matter. But we're going to emphasize the first part. It is the glory of God to conceal a thing.
Amen.
Now we go to Matthew 13, verse 44. Again, the kingdom of heaven is the house of Israel.
Yes.
The kingdom of heaven is like unto treasure hid in a field.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's hidden in a field. The which, when a man hath found, that man is Christ, he hides it.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Figure that one out. So this house of Israel
Yes.
is hidden in plain
Amen.
sight.
Yep. Amen.
So this treasure in the field is Israel. The field is the world. The kingdom is the house of Israel. So Christ comes and finds it. Then he hides it again. And for joy thereof goeth and sells all that he hath and bought the field.
Yep.
We didn't sell anything. Christ is the man in this story that sold everything and bought the treasure. He bought the field to get the treasure. His object was the treasure,
Yep.
not the world.
Amen.
The object was to buy the treasure.
Yes.
Yes.
And in the meantime, the sufficiency of the price, he just bought the whole thing. You follow me? So, Proverbs says, it is the glory of God to conceal a thing. I want to add a second part to that phrase. It is the glory of God to conceal a thing, especially when that thing is threatened by the God of this world.
Amen. Good.
Amen.
Especially when that treasure
Yes.
is threatened by the God of this world. So, kind of a flashback, a speculative flashback. What would have happened if we'll say 200 years ago, the Christian church in the Western world knew that they were Israel? Would it have been a good thing? This is speculation, of course. Would it have been a wonderful thing and everybody knows the plan of God and knows who we are and everything? Or would it have been taken, used, abused, and perverted,
Yes.
and made into something totally different
Amen.
than what it really is?
Yes.
So we're going to rely upon the sovereignty of God,
Amen.
that it has been His will to conceal this matter.
Amen.
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 You follow me?
Yes.
Everybody on the same page.
Yes, sir.
Amen.
It has been His will, His plan, that this great truth is hidden.
Amen.
Jesus found us. He came to the house of Israel. Anybody, and I'm not trying to just be cute, but anybody that can read the English language
Yeah.
on a 6th grade level, that has any cognitive thinking ability at all, read this book and say, who did Jesus come to? Who did the Redeemer come to? He came to His own. He came to the house of Israel.
Amen.
And who's the father of these people? A man by the name of Abraham.
Yes.
And he built a city. God built this city, Revelation 21:22.
Yeah.
And it's called New Jerusalem. Emphasis on the new part.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's 12 gates to this city.
Yep.
And these names over the gates goes right back to Genesis 35,
Amen.
Right. Amen.
36, 48, 49.
So,
So let's rest. The Lord knows what He's doing.
amen.
He bought the field to get the treasure, and then He hid the treasure. It was hidden before, now it's hidden again. But the wonderful thing about the second hiding is that the treasure has been paid for.
Amen. Hallelujah. Yes.
You follow me?
Yep.
Amen.
He sold all that he had. He gave his life, and he bought the treasure.
Yes.
The treasure has been paid for.
Amen.
Now, we go back to the book of Romans. Chapter number 3, verse 1. Paul is dealing with, in this transition age in which he lived, between the cross and the destruction of Jerusalem. He's dealing with the house of Judah and the house of Israel. And he's having to tell these Christians that the law of ordinances is over. All the blood sacrifice, all the ordinances of worship, etc., they're over with. So he starts out in chapter number 3, and he has to deal with the Judeans, or quote, the Jews. We're going to call them Judeans. He's going to have to deal with the Judean concepts and the 10-house Israelite concept. Chapter 3, verse 1. What advantage then hath the Jew, or the Judean? or the Judahite? Or what profit is there of circumcision? And then he says, much every way. Chiefly because that unto them were committed the oracles of God.
Amen.
I think what he is saying is, in 721, the Lord cut off northern Israel. Boom, they're out of their land.
Yes.
They have been removed because they stunk so bad in his nostrils. He had to get rid of them. But Judah was not divorced. It remained a nation, a body politic, but it was corrupt. It was so corrupt that Jeremiah said that it had putrefying sores. That's pretty bad.
Yeah.
It was running with iniquitous pus, is what he was saying. And Paul comes along and says, there has been an advantage of the house of Judah over the house of Israel because they were given the oracles of God. What were the oracles of God? This is a general term, oracles of God. They were given, number one, the law. Number two, the priesthood. Number three, the temple. Number four, the royal Davidic line. Number five, the token of the covenant, which was circumcision. Number six, the Sabbath. Number seven, the prophets. And number eight, all the laws of worship or the ordinances. So they, quote, kept this, but in pretense only.
Amen.
But God kept that nation intact. So Paul is saying to the Judeans, you should know better. You were given all these oracles of God. Verse 3. For what if some did not believe? Shall their unbelief make the faith of God without effect? Now I want to read this a little different. For what if some did not believe? For what if some Judeans did not believe? Shall their unbelief make the covenants of God without effect? God forbid.
Amen.
Yea, let God be true, and every man a liar. As it is written in Psalm 51:4, that thou mightest be justified in thy sayings, and mightest overcome when thou art judged. Now, let's turn to Psalm 51, verse 4. Against thee and thee only have I sinned, and done this evil in thy sight. Now this is David praying. This is his prayer of repentance. That thou mightest be justified when thou speakest, and be clear when thou judgest. So David is speaking these words that are repeated by Paul. David is speaking, and he says, against thee and thee only have I sinned, and done this evil in thy sight, that you, Lord, might be fair or justified when you condemn me. You follow me?
Yeah.
He is telling the Lord, you're justified. When you speak to me and you condemn me, you're justified. Because Paul puts it a little more plain when he says, let God be true and me a liar.
Yes.
In other words, I am guilty. Lord, you're right. You are correct when you judged me.
Yes.
That thou mightest be justified. See, he's talking to God. That you might be justified. Lord, that you might be justified in thy sayings, and mightest overcome when you, the Lord, judge me.
Amen.
So what Paul is saying to these Judahites, these probably self-righteous, really religious folks, he is saying, you're guilty. And if I can say it this way, you are guilty. God was fair when he judged you, and you are a liar when you try to justify yourself. Well, what's the lesson to us? Folks, if you're wrong, you're wrong. If I'm wrong in committing a sin or an offense against a brother or sister, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong.
Amen.
Hello.
Amen. Amen.
Let God be true. What he is doing, he is cutting at the very root of religious self-justification.
Amen. Yes.
He's cutting us down, I mean right down to the very root. In me dwelleth no good thing.
Amen.
So this book of Romans, I don't know, boy, we're moving mighty slow. It may be next March before we finish. But the Lord is saying something through this man, Paul.
Amen.
Self-justification. And he's talking to the Jew in this case. And he's talking to us.
Amen.
Self-justification to get you nowhere. But if our unrighteousness commend the righteousness of God, what shall we say? Is God unrighteous who taketh vengeance? I speak as a man. God forbid. For then how shall God judge the world? If he's unrighteous, how is he going to judge the world?
Amen.
For if the truth of God hath more abounded through my lie unto his glory, why yet am I also judged as a sinner?
Amen.
And then he says this, but not rather, parentheses, as we be slanderously reported, as some affirm that we say. In other words, some people are saying about me, Paul, some people are saying there's a rumor out about me that I believe, let us do evil, that good may come. And he says, those people who say that, their damnation is just.
Amen.
In other words, I am not saying, well, God is so merciful. I'm going to let him use some of that mercy on me, so I'm going to go out and I'm going to rob a bank or lie or cheat or commit some kind of sin. That way the mercy of God get it going, you know. Paul said, no, that's not what I'm saying. What then? Are we better than they? No, in no wise. For we have before proved, both Judeans and Gentiles or Israelites, that they are all under sin. Now, in verses 10 through 18, he quotes Isaiah 53, Psalm 14, 3, Psalm 140, Psalm 10, Isaiah 59, and Psalm 36. And he's building a case. And every one of them, every scripture from 10 to 18 is describing wicked human nature.
Amen.
But he already said both Judean and Israelite. So we can't lay all this over on the Judahites.
Yes. Amen.
Oh no, he's saying some pretty rough stuff about our human nature.
Yes.
That's 10 through 18. 19. Now we know that what things soever the law saith, it saith to them who are under the law. So both Judah and Israel were given the law.
Amen.
So what Paul is saying is that what things soever the law says, it applied to Judah and Israel. Every mouth may be stopped, that every mouth may be stopped. Can I give you a carnal example? Those of you who have had children, obstinate children, sassy children, and they do something wrong, and you're talking to them, you're giving them a lecture, and they're trying to out-talk you. And what's the old phrase? Shut your mouth. That's what Paul is saying. Because the kid is trying to justify himself. You ever had that experience?
Yes.
Justifying himself in his wrongdoing. And Paul says to both houses, shut your mouth.
Amen. Amen.
Plain English, Okie language.
Yes.
Every mouth may be stopped and all the world may become guilty before God. Therefore, by the deeds of the law, there shall no flesh be justified in his sight. For by the law is not justification, but the knowledge of sin.
Amen.
Martin Luther made that statement. He said, the law made me sinful. That's what Paul is saying. The law strengthened the fact that I'm a sinner. For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. So, Paul is pretty plain here. But, let's move on. But now the righteousness of God without the law is manifested, being witnessed by the law and the prophets. Righteousness without the keeping of the law. Even the righteousness of God, when I say law, I mean that part of the law whereby you made your offering to God to justify yourself. It doesn't mean obedience to moral law. You know, thou shalt not do this and that. Those laws are still in effect. And statutes and judgments to govern a nation or a society, those are still in effect. But it's those laws whereby men brought their offerings to God, and that was their offering, that, in other words, for their justification. Please forgive me, here's my offering. Well, we have no offering. Except one. And that's Christ's offering.
Amen.
So, when we're condemned, when we stand before the judgment of God, nothing in my hand I bring.
Amen.
Simply to thy cross I cling. Here's my offering, the Son of God. So anyway, verse 22, even the righteousness of God, which is by faith of Jesus Christ, unto all and upon all them that believe, for there is no difference. See, he's talking about the two houses, no difference. For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. being justified freely by His grace
Amen.
through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus, whom God hath set forth to be propitiation or complete satisfaction through faith in His blood, to declare His righteousness for the remission of sins that are past through the forbearance of God. The forbearance means self-restraint. In other words, through the self-restraint of God, instead of killing the house of Israel, He restrained Himself from that
Yes.
and forgave them.
Thank God.
To declare, I say, at this time, His righteousness. You notice it says His.
Yes.
That He might be just and the justifier of him which believeth in Jesus. Well, I'm going to go ahead and read the rest of the chapter. Where is boasting then? Where did he say it's at? It's excluded. I have nothing to boast of. We have nothing to boast of.
Amen.
By what law? Of works. You're going to boast of law or works? Nay, but by the law, faith. Aren't you glad you're living this side of the cross?
Amen. Amen.
Instead of all that bloody sacrifice you had to bring
Amen.
every day and every month and every
Amen.
year.
Amen.
Shooey. Wherefore we conclude that a man is justified by faith without the deeds of the law. You see, the God of the Judeans only, He is not also of the Gentiles. Yes, of the Gentiles or Israel also. Seeing it is one God which shall justify the circumcision by faith, that's the house of Judah that kept that practice, and the uncircumcision, that's the house of Israel, through faith, both by faith. Do we then make void the law through faith? God forbid. Yea, we establish the law.
Amen.
Well, when we approach chapter 4, we must keep in mind that Paul, you notice in verse 4, verse 1, what shall we say then that Abraham, our father? He's talking to Israelites. Our father. Hello?
Yes.
Our father.
Yes.
Amen.
He didn't just say Abraham, he said Abraham,
Our Father.
our father. He's talking to those brethren, which means of the same womb,
Yes.
same family. And the reason why I bring this out so strongly is because the book of Romans has been abused,
Oh, yeah.
I think. And it's been made just this generic letter.
Yeah.
No, it was written to the house of Judah and Israel.
Mm-hmm.
So when we approach chapter 4, we must keep in mind this thought. Paul predicates, establishes the whole doctrine of salvation based on God's election and relationship with the family of Abraham, and not on just a universalistic worldwide premise. I hope you got that.
Yep.
If we take Abraham out of the context of Romans, you have a gourd.
Yeah.
You know, it's just
And a dry one at that.
just a shell. It's
Yes.
meaningless. He builds a foundation of salvation on justification by faith, using Abraham as the example years, centuries before the law was given
Yes.
at Mount Sinai.
Amen.
Amen.
So the Abrahamic covenant has never, I know I'm a broken record, has never been
Amen.
rescinded.
Amen.
The law of Moses, it had a beginning and it had an end,
Yes.
the ordinances. But the Abrahamic covenant, when it was established for 40,000 generations. A 1,000 generations.
Yes.
About 40,000 years.
Yeah.
So we've got a ways to go yet.
Amen.
And people tell me, oh, well, this thing of Israel being still in the earth, oh, we're all Israel. The whole world is Israel. Or either they were bred out of existence, or they fell in some big hole somewhere and they don't exist. The Bible is written to, for, and about
Amen.
the Abrahamic
Amen.
family.
Amen.
And I know it's blessed other nations and other families. Because, why? Basically because we brought them in
Yes.
under the law. And therefore, if you know the law, you're guilty.
Mhm.
Anyway, verse 1, what shall we say then that Abraham our father, as pertaining to the flesh, hath found? For if Abraham were justified by works, he hath whereof to glory, but not before God. For what saith the Scripture? Abraham believed God, and it was counted unto him for righteousness. That's Genesis 15:6. Years. 400 years. 400 years before Moses. And Abraham is justified by faith.
Yep.
Now to him that worketh is the reward not reckoned of grace, but of debt. I think a lot of this is somewhat redundant, but it's good for us because we never really learn anything, they say, until we hear it 7 times.
Mhm.
And then I still doubt myself. But to him that worketh not, but believeth on him that justifieth the ungodly, his faith is counted for righteousness. Worketh not, but believe. And then he says this. He says, he uses Abraham as the example. Verse number, I'm going to skip over the context of David for now. We'll come back to that in a minute. But verse 10, he's still talking about Abraham. How was it then reckoned? When he was in circumcision or in uncircumcision? Not in circumcision, but Abraham was justified before he was circumcised.
Amen.
So even the token
Yeah.
of circumcision did not justify Abraham,
Amen.
because circumcision was only a token of the covenant. It was not the covenant.
Amen.
Amen.
You follow me?
Amen.
So when the Lord told Abraham what he was going to do, Abraham believed it. He was justified by faith,
Yes.
and then he was circumcised.
Yes.
Then his works came later.
Yes.
Telling you folks, this makes me feel like just, hey, I'm just going to cast myself upon the mercy of God.
Amen.
I have nothing to brag about.
Sure.
Who, me? No.
Hallelujah.
Anybody here have anything to brag about before God? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Here we are.
Yes.
Your word, we believe it.
Amen.
Okay. Lost my place. 11. And he received the sign. See, the sign.
Yeah.
the token of circumcision, a seal. It was only a seal of the righteousness of the faith which he had yet been uncircumcised, that he might be the father of all them that believe, though they be not circumcised, that righteousness might be imputed unto them. That's a whole new subject, the imputation of righteousness. Now, do we believe in sovereign grace?
Amen.
I think this proves it.
Amen.
People say, are you a sovereign grace church? Well, what other kind of grace is there?
Yes, amen.
It's all sovereign. Absolutely. And the father of circumcision to them who are not of the circumcision only, but who also walk in the steps of that faith of our father Abraham, which he had, being yet uncircumcised. Well, verse 13. For the promise that he should be the heir of the world. I want to stop right here and make a comment. Abraham, through the Abrahamic covenant, I believe, was not only selected by God to be the heir of South Africa, Great Britain, Northwest Europe, the United States, Canada, North America, and Australia, where Israelites live. He was the heir of the whole planet,
Yes.
the whole world. Because someday the glory of the Lord shall cover the earth. Help me out.
As the waters cover the
As
sea.
the waters cover the sea. For the promise that he should be the heir of the world was not to Abraham or to his seed through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. For if they which are of the law be heirs, faith is made void, and the promise made of none effect.
Yes.
Because the law worketh wrath. For where no law is, there is no transgression.
Amen.
Therefore, it is of faith, that it might be by grace,
Amen.
to the end the promise might be sure to all the seed of Abraham. So there's a reference to Israel, the Abrahamic family, when he mentioned Abraham. Then another reference when he mentioned to all the seed. Not to that only which is of the law, but to that also which is of the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all, both houses, Judah and Israel. Another reference to Judah and Israel in the book of Romans.
Yes.
He's the father of us all. The reconciliation that needed to take place was the house of Israel and the house of Judah come back together,
Amen.
not, quote, Jews and Gentiles. I think everybody follows me there. So, in verse number 17, as it's written, I have made thee a father of many nations. That's another reference. Father of many nations. Before him whom he believed, even God who quickeneth the dead and calleth the things which be not as though they who against hope believe in hope that he might be the father of many nations. According to that was written, so shall thy seed be. He's talking about He's talking about Israel is all through the book of Romans. It's predicated on this premise that salvation is based. He bases the doctrine of salvation by grace using Abraham and David. Well, I got to speed up. Let's go back to verse 6. The first example of justification by faith was Abraham. The second one was David. Now, we all know the story of David. We all know this young lady called Bathsheba. This record being true, it happened. It happened.
Yes.
He got his eyes looking over the wall. Oh, this is a man after God's own heart. This is the man that God made a covenant with, the Davidic covenant.
Yeah.
This is the man that's going to be the ancestor of the Redeemer.
Yes.
You got looking over the wall. Another man's wife. She was bathing. And she didn't have anything on. And he says, hey, I'm going to scheme, get that young lady's husband killed. You know, that's really something.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
If I could just get him killed. So I'll call Joab, my general, and say, can you put him, Uriah, can you put him at the forefront so that, you know, I don't have to kill him with the sword, but an enemy soldier can kill him, and I'm in the clear. That's devious.
Yes, it is. Yes.
That's devious.
Yes.
Now, how long did this take place? Probably took place over a matter, maybe several weeks. So he's living with this lust and with this murder in his heart. And he's going to have his way. He's going to get that woman. This is David, the man that we look up to.
Yes, yes, yes.
And the Lord's going to sit on his throne.
Yeah.
Amen.
This guy was really something. But Paul uses him as an example of justification by faith.
Amen.
Yes.
According to the law of Moses, which David was living under, guess what? He was guilty of murder. He was guilty of adultery. So guess what should have happened to him?
Yes. So done.
He should have been killed.
Amen.
Stoned, or however they would have done it. But he wasn't. Verse 6, chapter 4. Even as David also describes the blessedness of the man unto whom God imputeth righteousness without works, saying, blessed are they whose iniquities are forgiven and whose sins are covered. Blessed is the man to whom the Lord will not impute sin.
Amen.
Verse 9. Cometh this righteousness or blessedness then upon the circumcision only, or upon the uncircumcision, heathenized Israel? For we say that faith was reckoned to Abraham for righteousness, and it was reckoned to David for righteousness. Now let's go back in the book of Psalms. '51. I know I'm giving you the whole bale of hay today. But folks, Paul preached for hours.
Yes.
Okay, Psalm 51 and Psalm 32. Paul quotes Psalm 32. Verse 1. Now David was guilty.
Yes.
We're not going to make any excuses.
Amen.
But he wrote this in Psalm 32. Blessed is he whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. Blessed is the man unto whom the Lord imputeth not iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no guile. In other words, the Lord had removed all sense of guilt. Psalm 51, we'll end there. Verse 7. It's all beautiful, but
Yes. Amen.
David is praying, purge me with hyssop. I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Make me to hear joy and gladness, that the bones which thou hast broken may rejoice again. Hide thy face from my sins, and blot out all mine iniquities. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Cast me not away from thy presence, and take not thy Holy Spirit from me. And restore unto me the joy of thy salvation, not my salvation.
Amen.
Restore unto me the joy of thy salvation, and uphold me with thy free spirit. A guilty man, he knew he was guilty. And he was justified by faith. Now, our God, through Christ, and Christ alone, He bore our sins and the consequences of those sins on the cross.
Yeah.
You don't have to pay money. You don't have to go to a church to be justified. You don't have to read the Bible all the way through. You don't have to go to some kind of training center. You don't have to do any religious stuff. Believe that you're a sinner. Accept the fact that you're a sinner. Accept the fact that you cannot save yourself. And number 3, accept the fact and believe that the price has been paid by another.
Amen.
And accept it. We've all heard the excuse. I've heard it years ago. I'm not good enough to be a Christian. I've been told that. You know, you ask people to come to church and so forth. I'm not good enough. You don't know my life. That's the guy the Lord's looking for.
Yeah, exactly.
He's the very man the Lord's looking for.
Amen.
This scoundrel,
Yes.
David the scoundrel.
Yeah.
And there's Paul used David, Abraham, as 2 examples of justification by faith.